I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, for what you do, because I thought I had a pretty good grasp on the arguments for theism, and I have learned all kinds of wacky theories since I started watching your program. So
you're welcome.
Thank you for that.
All right.
So I was indoctrinated when I was born, obviously, and it took me a really long time to get to the point of being a comfortable atheist, where I don't have that nagging feeling of, well, what if I'm wrong anymore, and I'm not worried about hell and all those sorts of things. And I made a point in raising my daughter to not include any of these teachings, because I don't think... It's not that I didn't want to tell her that people believe in God. It was that I didn't think that she was old enough yet to understand the breadth of religion and the implications. And
how old is she now?
She's 7 now.
Okay.
So we haven't even got to the point of discussing the reality of Santa Claus yet. So, but my hand has sort of been forced, because we were driving the other day, and she just made a comment in passing. We passed the cemetery, and she said, "Oh, look, Mom, there's Jesus' grave." Oh. And I went, "What?" First of all, how do you, where did you get Jesus from? And second of all, how do you think that that's his grave? So I guess it was a picture on the tombstone of Jesus. And I was like, well, I don't even know where to start with this, because first of all, if there was a Jesus, that is not what he looked like. And then you have to go back to, where did people even get the idea of who this is? So we had a short conversation, basically. Well, where did you get that idea from, and who taught you about this? And she sort of had a vague understanding of God, and so we started from the beginning. And I told her, basically, a long time ago, people didn't have answers for things. They looked at this fireball in the sky, and they knew that it was good for them because it helped plants grow and it kept them warm and it gave them light. But then it went away at the end of the day, and they didn't know what to do. So they thought, if I scratch my nose and I shake my leg and it comes back, then that must be appeasing somebody, so I'm going to keep doing that. And so I got her to understand the concept of how sort of God was, the inception of God, I guess, and for humanity, as far as I could, narrow it down so that she would understand it. And I got her to refute it, basically. But then we got to the subject of heaven and hell, and I very casually said, so because there's no God, then obviously that there's also no heaven, no hell. And her eyes welled up with tears, and I'm going to get upset talking about this. And she said, I don't want to talk about this anymore, Mom. And I said, why are you upset? And she said, well, I thought if there's no heaven, then I can't see Gran or Tay, which is our family dog. I can't see them anymore. And I was so mad at first. Somebody had put this idea in her head that there is an afterlife to look forward to, because I was so adamant about teaching her that this is our life, and you make this time count with the people that you love, and then when you lose them, you have their memory to look back on. So really what I wanted to ask you guys is, what is your advice going forward? Basically, I kind of scrambled through it because I was so devastated that she was sad. And I said, well, maybe when you die, you can pick whatever happens to your soul or whatever, and you can go be with Gran and Tay. And I kind of, because I didn't know what to do. And I guess I'm just looking for advice from you. How would you approach this? Because obviously I never would have taught her that. We've dealt with loss together, and I never gave her an explanation of heaven. We just said these people are gone now, and we can miss them, and we can think about them. I mean, she wrote a book about the dog that she looks at all the time. And, but I'm so mad that somebody put this idea in her head, and I don't know how to fix it now.
Well, fortunately, you called the show on the right day, because you ended up with the two hosts who are both parents. So.
Yes, that's very fortunate.
Yeah.
Well, if I may, unless you want to launch in first.
Go ahead.
So I apologize beforehand, but before I get to your question, I would just like to offer this as a teachable moment to other parents out there. Because religion is pervasive in all our cultures, and I don't know if it was a reasonable expectation that you could just not say anything about religion for your kid's whole life and let them get all the way to 7 and not hear anybody's opinion. So, I mean, it's not just yours.
Can I address that quickly, Russell?
Mm-hmm.
My aha moment, I guess, was, I can't believe everybody keeps saying that. That's like an Oprah thing. But I was in high school. I was in a Catholic high school, and one of our compulsory courses was a world religions class.
Yeah.
And that's what opened my eyes. I saw all of these different religions that had basically the same foundations. And then I thought, well, why do I think that what I believe is right when all these people think that what they... So my intention had always been that when she is able to sort of grasp this idea of this broad concept, that I would sit her down and we would talk about all of the religions from a skeptical standpoint. But I don't think she's old enough to grasp even skepticism right now. Well, she still needs me to basically tell her what's right and wrong.
Oh, so I certainly disagree with that part.
Yeah.
I think kids can understand skepticism from a very young age. I think you just need to, I mean, the world is full of stuff that people are presenting as factual. I mean, even all the way down to if your kid watches cartoons or Sesame Street, then they're probably aware, or should be, of the distinction between the giant Muppets that walk around and people they see in real life. And I think
but I mean, she still watches Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and we go to Disneyland, and she thinks that those are real still. She's still very young, right? So it's different for different children, I suppose, in the way that you raise them. I like that she still has, a belief in some magic things, because I think that's part of childhood, and maybe it's because mine was a little bit different, that I wanted to sort of protect that in her. But I just hadn't got to that point yet, and I certainly didn't think that anybody would be giving her these ideas.
I'd just like to point out, and this is the source of the teachable moment, you weren't ready to give her this information about God, but rest assured that other Christian kids are very ready to give your kid their opinion about God, and that's going to be true just about no matter where you live. And I'm not criticizing your parental approach. I'm just pointing out that that's going to happen to people, and they should be aware of it going in if they want to take that into consideration when they consider how other parents might teach their kids about the topic. Go ahead.
So, I mean, one of the things that I was concerned about raising my son in a household of atheists was that people were going to tell him about Christianity, and I would not be able to control that conversation. And so my goal from the time he was fairly young was to inoculate him against those concepts. So when you inoculate them, you don't withhold information about religions. You provide more information than the average Christian kid is going to get. And so what we did was we started with Greek mythology. So Greek and Roman mythology. Read them the stories. And, you can select the stories carefully, because some of those stories have adult themes. Okay? But again, the Greek and Roman gods were portrayed more as like flawed humans with godlike powers than the Abrahamic religions portray their God. And so I think it ends up being much more relatable. But you can introduce the concept of a demigod, and that's very useful when it comes to talking about Jesus. Because when I had the conversation about Jesus with my son, when I explained to him that according to the legend, Jesus' father was Yahweh, and his mother was Mary, and he immediately said, "Oh, he's a demigod." Like, yep, that's it. So it's much harder to convince a kid that Christianity has some insight into the truth once you've basically inoculated them against some of the central concepts. And as far as my son is concerned, Jesus is not, God here on earth. He wasn't actually, this whole idea of a triune God is just absurd to him.
He's just a demigod from another story, like the ones that he's heard before. Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll do that with the next kid, but I already screwed this one up. So
no. Your child's critical thinking skills are intact, and all you have to do is introduce her to Greek and Roman mythology.
Well, that's not all.
Not it.
In terms of the afterlife conundrum, though, because, I mean, it's not the same thing as telling her there's no such thing as Santa Claus, because at the end of the day, that holiday still remains. You still get presents. But when you say there's no heaven, then all of that goes away, and there's nothing anymore. So
talk to her,
you just have to do it.
But there are concepts in other religions about that. And so there's a concept of, like, an afterlife in Greek and Roman mythology. There's also, the Norse mythology. You can talk about Valhalla, all kinds of stuff.
Right, but none of it leads to the truth. Well, I mean, not the truth as I understand it.
But the thing is, what you want her to do is start thinking about these things, and the fact that humans have always come up with these concepts, and you know what? She's pretty young. She'll get there, and she's allowed to have a little time to grieve because something she thought was true maybe isn't.
Right.
And that's okay. I mean, she feels however she feels, and you're there to support her, and she'll be fine.
Now, you say that you think you've screwed her up because now she's feeling existential about death and upset about it. I got news for you. Every kid has to deal with that at some point in their life, and it doesn't matter what they thought about it. I have seen an atheist parent who's a friend of mine on Facebook recently raise her kid atheist all the way through, never had any illusions about heaven and hell. And then one day at like age 9 or 10, the kid just says, I don't want to die, and like has to deal with this problem that is a fundamental part of human existence, like we all do. I went through that. I mean, I had like concerns about death and dying when I got to a certain point in my childhood, and then I had a resurgence of it around the time I hit 30, where I would get depressed for a while and also think a lot about the fact that my parents, who aren't dead yet still, but will eventually be gone, and I will miss them. But that's something everybody has to face up to, and I think part of our
humanity.
Yeah. And it's sad, but also, I guess the way that I would or have been and continue to want to be comforted when it comes to death is that you hold your loved ones in your memory and you write things about them, about what you remember about them, and you tell people about them, and you try to exemplify the things that they valued in their lives. And you also try to live your life in a way that touches people around you so that they will want to carry a part of you with them too. It's not as good as living forever. I can't lie about that. Living forever sounds awesome.
Who you're living forever with.
It depends.
And who you have to worship to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I guess the mitigating factor on that is you can continue worshiping those people and it actually doesn't make you live forever. That's just nonsense.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time and for your advice.
Right.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah. Thanks for calling. Anything else to add?
No, I just, I think that, when your kid is, 7 years old, there's still a lot of room to mitigate whatever has happened before.
Sure, 7-year-olds are resilient.
Yeah, they're pretty resilient, so it'll be okay.
Yeah. And I also wanted to say that I remember when you and I talked to Dale McGowan about atheist parenting, and I think one thing we all agreed on was that Oh man, now it just slipped out of my mind.
Basically, one of the things I remember from that conversation is that you teach your children how to make moral judgments, not based on a set of rules, but on, what does this harm someone else? What does this do to the people around me? And if you teach them to make decisions for the right reasons, then at the end, it doesn't matter if they're theists or atheists, because they'll make those decisions for the right reasons.
Yeah. But I do remember what I was going to say. It's that a lot of atheist parents have been indoctrinated. In fact, it doesn't surprise me that our last caller focused on her indoctrination. But then they react strongly in the opposite direction and say, well, I'm just not going to push my opinions on my child at all. And that's not, in my opinion, really doing them a favor, because you are going to be the strongest influence in their life. And if you have opinions that run counter to culture, to the popular opinion that they'll run into at school or in the rest of their lives, you owe it to them to let them know how you feel about important issues. That doesn't mean that you're going to do the Christian thing of, well, you'll worship my God or I'll disown you.
Yeah.
But there's a big gap between not forcing your opinions to be their opinions and not telling them what you think about stuff at all.
Yeah, I think leaving a vacuum in that place is not really a viable option, because someone will fill that space, whether it's a classmate or a teacher, or somebody will come in there and fill that space. And I think one of the things that I had concerns about when my son was very young was that I didn't want to teach him a lot of the Christian mythology, because a lot of it, once you're kind of on the other side of it and you look at it as an atheist, you see it as being kind of gruesome. It's a pretty horrible message all the way through. And so I didn't want to do that to my son. So I withheld a lot of that mythology, but I didn't withhold stories about religious thought from him. And I think that there's a way to do this. And I mean, it can be as simple as, get a copy of Aesop's Fables and read it to your kid.
Those are good stories.
And and explain, have conversations with your kid about what those things mean and how we figure out, how we're supposed to behave.
Yeah.